G'day, welcome. I'm Stephen Travers. Welcome to this live session, which is a second live session for me on answering your questions about drawing. But from my point of view, this is a very different one because it's a very different time of the day. It's the morning for me, 8:15 in the morning, which means that it's a very different time zone for a lot of the world compared to the session I led a few nights ago, which was an evening session, after dinner session. So I thought this was the chance to redo it, but to give other people in probably more the Americas a chance to hear. Are you in the Americas right now, the two people who have joined? Or is it a very early or very, very late time in the middle of the night in Europe for you? But whatever, I'd love to have your questions in this session. If you're able to join us live on the chat, asking me anything you like about the drawing process, and maybe particularly if you're a beginner at drawing. It is early, so it's my early cup of coffee here. What would you like to ask about the drawing process? And in the meantime, I have a couple of questions that I've prepared while you're thinking of yours. So the first question I think I'll answer while I'm still waiting for some questions from you on the chat. So please, if you have anything you'd like to ask me about drawing, use the chat for that. A little rhyme. But I thought I'd answer the question. If you're an absolute beginner, so if you're someone who's wanted to draw for whatever reason you want, what is the best way to start? And I would say the best way to start is to think of learning a musical instrument, think of learning anything, where we start at a simpler level and we build. We get a feel for our natural starting point. Now, drawing's a bit different to a musical instrument, let's face it, because most of us have done some drawing, to use that word in a broad way, in our life for some reason or another, and often at school, but often just for fun. And so we have a sense of what's involved in drawing that's often beyond what our understanding of drawing, of learning a musical instrument might be. But that's very different to thinking, I want to start to learn. I want to start a process where I'm going to become quite proficient in this. So if this is what you're wanting to do with drawing, what's the best way to start it then? And I would say, yeah, firstly, realize that this is a learning experience. And while we might have drawn for fun up till now, once we start to get serious about learning, we will hit challenges. And so it's not going to be the same as just doing little whimsical doodles or things might have done at school because you had to. But it's a bit different making a choice and working hard to see improvement. So be prepared for that. But the other thing I'd say is start the way you want to finish. And I say that because there is a lot of choice in any creative endeavor. There's really as much choice as our imagination, but we can't do everything at once. We can't explore everything at once, and we certainly can't learn everything at once, and we can't improve everything at once. And so by narrowing what we do at a given point in time, we can actually end up seeing more improvement on that, in that area. And if you've got a question you'd like to ask me about the drawing process, whether it's a question that arises from your own work, whether it's a question that's arisen from watching some of my videos, or it's a question that's coming to you now, or you've not really drawn but you'd like to, but have some questions about it, please ask me now on the chat. I would love to have some of your questions to answer. Hello, Saren. I was wondering, what are some essential skills or techniques that every artist should master? Look, that's a great question because it gives me a chance to say something really important, which is that it's really natural when we think of drawing that we picture a drawing in our head and we see a sheet of paper, say, with ink marks or pencil, whatever it's drawn in on it. And so our focus is on those marks. Our focus is on the lines, the dots, the curves, the way they've all been put together to create the effect of the drawing. And so we look at them and we think, oh man, look at all those long straight lines. How do they draw that? Or look at all those the curves, look at the hatching, look at the control, look at all these dots that seem to say nothing when you look up close, but when you look back from a distance, they create this amazing visual effect. It's very easy to focus on that. But the thing that's often not realized when we draw and when we start to draw, but even when we've been drawing for a while, is that the real skill, the thing that I think characterizes each of us as someone who draws and creates our drawing style and means our drawings probably look different from each other. The real thing is not having the skill to draw that straight line. But I will talk about those things in a moment. It's not the skill to draw those straight lines, but it's knowing where to put those lines. It's knowing whether to use a straight line or whether to use a series of less straight lines. It's knowing what sort of marks to put. It's having worked out, looking at our reference or from our imagination, it's having worked out what sort of effect we want to create in our drawing and working out what sort of marks will create that effect. And then specifically now putting those marks on the paper to create those effects. Does this make sense, Sarah? Because this is the thing that we don't think about. We think that when we look at a drawing, when we look at a photo, to draw, our challenge is to copy it and therefore to have lines to create, if you like, the outlines of the objects in our reference. And we can draw like that. And it partly depends. See, this is where knowing how we want our drawings to look at the end is important, because when we look at a photo, say, and we're thinking, what lines can I use to create that on my paper? What we can often end up with is a fairly cartoon-like effect, because cartoons as a genre are characterized by an emphasis on outline and often a bit of a simplification of other things. So I'll have another cup of my coffee, another sip of coffee. So it's not so much about outlining shapes that we see in our reference, but it's about, in our reference, seeing an effect, seeing a visual effect that we want to capture in our marks, in our lines on our paper. And it's not so much putting the marks on the paper, but it's knowing what marks we're going to want to put and having a sense of for what purpose. What effect are we trying to create? Are we trying to create an effect of shadows? Very often, I find when I draw, I'm not drawing the object, but I'm actually creating the shadows that will highlight the object, that will in effect make the object pop into being. But I'm not focused on drawing the object. I'm focused on drawing the shadows. And this is particularly important when we have a lot of detail that's quite small and it actually becomes too small to draw the object. So it's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking that determines what we do. And when we start drawing, I think often because as children, we do, which is our experience, because if we've grown up, we've all been children in order to get there. We often are copying cartoons or cartoon-like drawings where there is an emphasis on copying an outline with a line. But as an adult drawing, that's going to be very limited for the sort of visual effect it creates. And this is why, I don't know if you've ever had this. love to hear if anyone listening right now has had this experience. But you've seen a drawing you've really liked that someone's done, and you've copied the drawing. It might be, well, it could be anything at all. Let's just say it's a nice street scene. You've copied the drawing that someone else has done. Maybe it's one of my drawings, and you're really, really happy with the result, and you think this is great, and you feel really encouraged by that result. And then you think, oh, I'm going to do my own drawing now. And then you find a similar sort of drawing to copy. Thanks for the like that just clocked over there, my first like for this. And you find even a fairly similar street scene, thinking this will be great. And then you don't know where to start. You don't even know where to start. And you feel a bit confused because you've just drawn this really, really nice drawing that you're looking at from someone else's drawing. And you thought, that's shown me I can do it. And yet when you go to do it again yourself now, but not using someone else's drawing, but a photo, you feel just as confused as if you haven't just done this nice drawing. And the reason is that when you copy someone else's drawing, you don't have to do any of that creative thinking at all, because they've already done it. They've already seen something and translated it into marks for the paper, and they've already copied it into worked out how to represent it, and then they've explored that on the page as they've done it. And you've been now just to copy that. You haven't had to do it. And all of this needs to come before the ink hits the paper, because if otherwise we don't know what we're doing. And if we copy other people's drawings, we don't get experience at that. And so it's a skill we never learn. And because we haven't learned it, we can't use it, or we can't develop it. We can't become proficient at it. And yet it's the skill that comes first. Looking at our reference and working out, how am I going to represent this on the paper, is important, because the truth is none of us are just copying the reference. None of us are just doing that. Good evening, Ian. None of us are just doing that. We're not just copying the reference. If you've just popped in, I'm answering questions in this session as well. And I thought I'd do it at a different time to the session I did a few days ago, just so that other people in the world who were asleep then had a chance. So the essential skills, Sharon, I would say, are observation and thinking of what marks create the effect. And when I talk about the effect, I think the best way to describe what I mean is, if we think of drawing a tree and we look at all the leaves, that's often a real problem when we draw, because we can see the leaves and we understand a tree and how it's formed and the complexity and the overwhelming detail. And then we start to draw the tree and we start to kind of draw leaves, but we don't know how, like how do you draw all the leaves of a tree? And we get overwhelmed with what we know and what we can see often in our photo or in front of us. And we just get tangled up in lines trying to draw leaves, and often we end up with more of a pattern than anything that's real looking. And so instead of that, we need to look at our tree and look at the overall form and think, as a whole, what's the effect of all these leaves together? And it will vary from tree to tree. It will vary according to how large the leaves are. It will vary according to how far we are from observing the tree. It will vary according to the light. It will vary according to our viewing position. Are we down looking up? Are we up looking down? Are we from the side? Whatever. It will vary according to the type of tree it is too, and the way it branches and so forth. And so all of these things will change how the foliage looks for this drawing. And so this is so the mistake is, we think, oh, I have to learn how the technique for drawing trees. Now, there is a technique for drawing trees, And I have a playlist on that, which, if you'd like my take on it, this is one of my paintings of big oil paintings of a tree behind me from before I started drawing. But there's no actual single, this is the way you will draw every tree. It doesn't work that way. It's every tree is a new possibility, but there are principles that we can use to kind of help guide our thinking for the particular tree in front of us. And so we look at the particular tree in front of us and we pay attention to things such as the edging, the silhouette edges, because that's fairly important for how we create a sense of realism. But there's also the lights and darks. So we're really seeing the tree canopy, especially if it's a very full tree, as a surface that undulates in and out with a certain surface texture that captures the light in a certain way. And the question is not how do I draw leaves, but how do I put marks on my paper to capture that visual effect of this surface? And that's what my tree drawing videos show. Look, Sarah, I have some videos on how to draw straight lines and things. And depending what we want to draw, those things can become more important. So if we like to draw architecture, it's good to practice straight lines. But how long we need to practice those lines for, how long we have to practice those lines for. How long? Sorry, I don't mean how long in time. I mean how long the lines should be. Depends on what size drawings we do and so forth. So, yeah. But play around. But I would say, seriously, I would say observation and learning to, in our mind, translate what we see into marks is the essential skill. Try not to fall into the mindset at the start of learning to draw that I'm copying this, that I've got to see the outlines and draw the outlines. When we do that, we often get a very two-dimensional page, a very two-dimensional image. But equally, the specific skills and techniques will depend on what subjects we want to draw, because some subjects are more challenging for some reason. So if you draw architecture, perspective is something it's helpful to understand. I mean, we can just draw what we see, but if we understand how perspective operates, we can see what's there more easily with more understanding, and that helps us see it more easily, and therefore we have more chance to draw it more accurately. So there are things like that. If I want to draw figures and people, then, which isn't a strong suit of mine. I mean, I put little figures in my streetscapes, and I've learned to sort of draw them in a way to create the effect of bustling pedestrians and people in the street. But I've never studied anatomy, but if I was basically drawing people, I would want to learn anatomy to understand how bodies move, how the muscles really work and join together. And that might be more important than building perspective. Mind you, of course, perspective applies to everything, because perspective is simply the way something looks from a particular point of view. So there's perspective with a building, but how a person looks changes how we view them from. And if you've ever looked at manga, you'll understand that lots of really dramatic perspectives of looking up at figures or looking down at figures or looking along arms at figures and so forth, creating a tremendous sense of visual drama. Well, that's perspective just being applied to people, and the way the human body is affected visually by how we look from is also connected with also perspective. Any tips on a new sketcher can practice loose lines and drawing? Joe, yeah, look, it's great. Yeah, often when we start to draw, we can be, as in start to learn to draw, we can be very tight. We can be very focused on when we feel that our goal in drawing is to copy the photo as carefully as possible, then depending a little bit on our personality, we can get very focused and feel the pressure that we have to keep everything exactly the same. and then we get tight and heavy and rigid, and we can end up with very heavily over outlined, stiffly drawn scenes. And if that's not what we want, and that can be a deliberate kind of technique we employ to create a certain effect in our drawing for our own creative reasons. But if it's not what we want, then developing a nice loose style is great. A nice loose gestural style is great. And because I've always loved detail, for me, the challenge has been to loosen up over my drawing experience. And so, look, I found the best ways to do that is actually to have a time pressure, to give myself something else to think about that takes me away from becoming overly focused in one part, and just keep moving quickly. And part of that, to stop myself getting overly focused, is to stop myself worrying too much about lines that aren't quite right or marks that aren't quite in the right place, but to keep working. I draw directly in ink. I don't use pencil at this stage unless it's a pencil drawing. But even if it's a pencil drawing, I don't use an eraser for the same reason. I found that to not use an eraser, to not have any chance of removing any marks I put on the paper, it let me develop more skill in just slowing down as much as I had to be accurate enough that I was happy with, that I could be accurate enough or close enough. And just not have the option of going, in a sense, going backwards. When we erase lines we've drawn, we sort of throw our drawing into reverse. We throw our thinking into reverse. And not using that doesn't mean that we don't ever make mistakes, but that we embrace the mistakes as part of the moving forward. And most mistakes aren't so drastic, aren't so dramatic that they ruin the whole thing. And learning to push through. And so going quickly just doesn't let us fall into that really, it's got to be perfect. And drawing directly in ink means we sort of cut our what's the word? Our safety harness or whatever, and we kind of just jump off and we think, well, I'll just do the best I can and see how it goes. And if I'm saying to myself, I need to finish this whole drawing in 20 minutes, then that pressure to just keep the momentum moving forward doesn't let me get too tight. It doesn't let me certainly doesn't let me get a ruler and start to get really tight that way. So it forces me to be more gestural. And one of the favorite drawings I've done is before I began to draw in ink was my wife we'd gone to another city in Australia that's not too far from Sydney. She had some work there, and I just went with a sketchbook to do some drawing. And I did a couple of drawings that, the location sketches that I really wasn't happy with. They just looked a bit labored, I thought. And it was almost time for me to meet up with her, and she said, now don't be late. And I said, no, I won't be. And as I was meeting up with her, I saw this cathedral on this big hill that overlooking the ocean. And I kind of hurried up there, and I got there, and I'm thinking, I've only got about 15, 20 minutes. And a huge gale had developed. It was so windy that it was all I could do to hold my sketchbook so it didn't blow away. And I was so pushed for time by the time I found where I wanted to sit and draw it, that I felt like I had 10 minutes to draw a cathedral. And so I had to be really quick. And I had no time to think or worry about things not being right. Even though it was pencil, there was just no thought of getting an eraser out, let alone using it. And I was so happy with the drawing at the end because I had so much more energy than the two drawings I'd done earlier, where I had unlimited time, where I'd almost slowed down more and more, and they became more and more frozen as I kind of went on. So I plan to do a video soon about drawing rhythm, the tempo of drawing a particular drawing, which I think will bring some of these thoughts into it. But yeah, in the meantime, I find the most helpful thing is to give ourselves a time limit. And look, obviously we don't, we can extend it for a few minutes here or there if we want to. But yeah, I found that incredibly, for me personally, because I can get very focused on drawing precisely. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. And I've done lots of drawings like that I really enjoy and I really like. And we can certainly incorporate that at times into a looser drawing style, more gestural style. But yeah. I don't think so much you need to practice loose lines as practice loose drawing. I mean, we can sit there and do this on a scrap of paper and over again, but I'm not sure that's really going to produce the sorts of drawings you want, because it's not putting the marks on the paper. It's the mindset that we have when we're drawing. It's the focus that we have. And we get very tight when we start to get this focus on precision and exactness. And if that's what we want in our drawing, if that's part of the visual effect we're trying for the end, then that's great. But if it's not, if we want a more kind of overall visually relaxed style, then that's not going to be helpful. So it's not trying to change our marks, it's changing our thinking, because our marks flow from our thinking, So is that helpful, Joe? Good day. Thanks, Ian. I've got a few other big paintings. I should put one of the other big paintings up for one of these sessions. Would you be interested in that if I change the backdrop? How would I draw from my mind as if I had been on a balcony looking down onto yourself and your surroundings? Okay, King Julian. Look, I've just done, like in the last week, maybe, a video on King Julian, Madagascar. I was wondering where I was remembering King Julian from. Yeah, I did a video just recently on the difference between drawing from a reference and drawing from our imagination. And as I don't particularly draw from my imagination as in a whole scene. I'm more likely to adjust a reference that I'm seeing in part. Maybe I take something out and I need something to put in the space. And so I'll use my imagination for that. It made me realize that when we draw from our imagination, what we're really drawing from is things that we've seen previously and we've stored in our mind as memories. And what that means is we can't, I think of it, I mean, I'm very old school, so I think of it as like a library in here, and we borrow books from the world, from life, from observation, and we put them in the library. And then if I want to draw something from my imagination, I rummage around in my library and I find books and pages and references that have got the images I want, and then I look at them. And so when I draw on the paper, I'm really looking at the books I filed away in my head. And the point is, I need to have filed them away I need to have filed enough reference material in here that I can accurately create in my mind now from those references something that will look as credible as if I were drawing from a photo that exactly had what I wanted. So the problem is, often when we go to draw from our imagination, from our mind, that we haven't put the appropriate reference material into our head to begin with. And so, because the thing is, it's not that we haven't seen the object, but that we haven't observed it in the way we need to observe it to be able to draw it. So for instance, if I've got memories of a tree in my head that I want to draw from my imagination, quite possibly it's a very particular type of tree. Maybe I haven't been overly interested in trees, so I've only really noticed some trees in detail. And the ones I have, maybe I've been very focused on all the leaves or something. But when I go to draw a tree, how the tree looks, as I was saying a bit earlier, depends on how close I am to it and the lighting and lots of other factors. And I may not fully understand the impact on a tree according to all those things when I go to draw it. But I think I know what a tree looks like. And of course I do, but I don't know how it's going to look in the very particular ways I need to know for this. And so we think we know, and we can't draw what we haven't seen. If I said draw an oxalotl, then you couldn't do that if you didn't know what an oxalotl was and how it looked, because you can't connect the word with any memories, and you may not even have any memories. You may never have seen one. I think it's some sort of amphibious kind of half fish, half lizard kind of thing. But it's just to serve my point that when we draw from imagination, we have to have put into our mind something suitable for what we want to take out. So drawing from imagination with figures, what we need to have done is we need to have observed figures in a 360-degree rotational perspective kind of thing. And we need to have really observed that. And we need to have probably played around with drawing from references, because that is easier than to have to find that from maybe 1,000 different experiences and images in our mind. It's easier if we've just got the one on the paper to use. So yeah, I was actually going to do a video on perspective and figures, more so for figures in a streetscape, which is where I used figures. And I took some photos of one of my kids sort of looking down on them and looking up and looking from the back and from different distances. I haven't actually made the video yet, but yeah, I hope that answers King Julian your question a bit. Hakeem, do I have any painting with color? Do you mean if I have any drawings with color? Because I mean, my paintings, such as the big tree behind, are certainly in color, in oils, and not a huge number, because I've really enjoyed drawing with pen. Most of my art experience actually is in painting. I started art later in life. I was 50 when I started my post-school art journey, and I started with oil painting, did that exclusively for 10 years, and then on a trip I began to play around with drawing, some location sketching, which was a last minute thought. And well, I've only, when I came back to Australia, I kept drawing, finished up some painting obligations, a couple of exhibitions and things, and then I really just focused on the drawing. And so I haven't, but I am wanting now to explore watercolor, because it seems to go with drawing so much. And I have certainly some watercolorist, streetscape watercolorist, location sketching watercolorists on Instagram who I follow, and bookmark a lot of their work, thinking, oh, when I'm ready to do this. Probably if I wasn't busy making so many YouTube videos, I might have started it. But I suppose I'll make some videos maybe about the journey of learning. I mean, it's a very different medium to oil paint, very different process. In some ways, oil paint's a bit like drawing with pencil. We can erase our mistakes. We can keep painting over. But watercolor is a lot like drawing directly with pen. Once it's on the paper, it's kind of there, and we can't take it away. So yeah, it'll be fun. The watercolor I've done so far, which is really just maybe a dozen things over the last few years, I've probably used it as if it were gouache or if it were oil paint. I haven't really exploited the particular strength of watercolor, which of course is the water aspect of it. So that's something I need to play around with. Yeah. That's well, impressionism. Ian, looking at your comment, Van Gogh did the same thing, scratching basic human figures. Yeah, of painting the effect, because with painting it's sort of even more so. I mean, the way I kind of developed my thinking and my technique for drawing trees and tree canopies and leaves directly came from the painting. Because with painting, you think you've got a brush that's sort of wide, you've got color, which you don't have, and you can apply value, lights and darks, more easily, more quickly than you can trying to hatch it with a fine black line. But I think the fact that you're not painting each leaf, but you're painting the overall effect of the leaves, was the mindset then, which when I was confronted with a tree and a pencil or a pen, helped me to kind of see the process that was involved of capturing the effect. But we can capture the effect with any small detail that's, such as, human figures, a crowd of people. We might draw the figures in front, but as the figures go backwards, at some point we disconnect from drawing each figure and we just draw the suggestion. We create the effect of the figure. So that's what I'm talking about there. Sarah, it's not as easy as I thought. No, it's probably not. But let's face it, a lot of us would never have started anything if we realized what was involved. But there's no reason why you can't work through all this as well. In fact, if we understand it, it may feel like it's harder, but if we understand what's happening, we've just made it actually a lot easier. And one of the problems, I think one of the difficulties being self-taught in our drawing, in art, in anything, is that we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes that means we can start too far ahead and we don't realize that there are some more fundamental things that it would be helpful to know. It doesn't mean it's not impossible to progress and do well, but it just might be a bit more of an effort. There might be some barriers that we come up against because of what we don't know, which can be a bit discouraging if we can't work out how to push through them. From Pox, not a question, just thank you for your help. Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Yes, Darren, I did paint this. It's actually quite a big painting. See? Oh, now you all know I have a rug on my knee. I just worked out I only got shorts on. It is winter in Australia, so. But I want to have shorts on for later in the morning. So, Ian, the oxylotl, it's the juvenile form of a salamander, is it? I didn't know that. Did you know that, or did you just did you Google it for me? Thank you. What do you think about ways to focus and not get distracted? It depends what you mean by distracted. So do you mean you get drawing but get distracted because you keep thinking of other things that you need to do or should do? I'm drawing, but I should be weeding the vegetable garden. I'm drawing, but I should be cleaning the bathroom. I'm drawing, but I really should go and do the washing or get the shopping or get ready for a meeting or something. Or do you mean distracted in that I'm trying to draw, but I don't know, I just somehow can't. I'm afraid of something going wrong, or because it's kind of different. If we're getting distracted, it means that something's not holding our attention in competition to other things. And sometimes the other things are overpowering our drawing thinking because they really are more important. Okay. I was going to draw, but I have a sick child, and now I'm actually distracted by my sick child, and that's an appropriate distraction. So I assume we're talking about distractions that aren't obviously more important than our drawing. And I think if we're being distracted, that's probably an indication that something's not right about our drawing experience, and therefore it's not holding us the way we're thinking or wanting it to hold us. Does this make sense? That there's some level of frustration or fear or dissatisfaction with our drawing experience. That means now it's there's a certain tension with doing it, a certain angst or a certain hesitation, because we're not sure of how we're going to feel at the end of the session, or we're not sure that what's going to be produced is worth the time and effort in relation to that time and effort being put into something else that I could do or I have to do. And so the question, if that's the case, the question is, what is it? What is it that means that I'm now starting to think that, I don't know, polishing my shoes is more important than sitting down and doing a drawing? What is it about the sitting down doing a drawing experience that isn't working for me as well? And it really can be a huge range of things. Maybe it's just not the right time to do it, and I'm feeling a bit guilty because I'm neglecting things that I feel I need to do. And there are seasons in life where we have more time for some things than others. There are seasons in life where we have more responsibilities depending on other choices that we've made in our life. There's perhaps a reason why some of the most productive artists have had a fairly singular life and haven't been hugely connected with other people, because it certainly helped their productivity. And that's clearly been such a surging part of who they are. But yeah. So does that make sense, Bobbin? Does that answer? What do I think about modern art? They sometimes just spray paint or draw squares. Look, I think a lot of abstract work can be very shallow, can be very superficial, but equally, I think good abstract work is incredibly confronting, and often we have to see it in real life. Now, of course, when I think about modern art, I think of what was modern art when I was at school, and I studied art just in high school. And so the 50s and 60s were modern art, and I realized that that's not what you're probably talking about. But if you know abstract expressionism from that era, I remember in art at school looking at drawings, at photos of artists such as Rothko, and thinking, that's just a red square with a black line across it, But then as an adult, at some point, decades later, I'm in the National Gallery in Canberra, Australia's capital city. It's not actually Sydney, it's Canberra. In the National Gallery there, looking at this enormous wall of one Rothko painting and just being mesmerized by the pulsing colors, the pulsing layers of reds that just, and then the tension that the black creates, and being totally overwhelmed at the effectiveness of it. The same with what's this? Another American guy. Also in the National Gallery, a painting that we paid $1 million for in the 70s, in the mid 70s, and it was very controversial. And I was in high school then, and I can still remember it. Called Blue Poles. It's the guy who did paint splattering enormous wall-sized canvases on the ground and just walked around them, dropping paint on them. Oh, what was the guy's name? Can't think of it. It'll come to me after we finish this session. But again, in the book, I thought it just looked like a kid spattering. But when you stand in front of Blue Poles, which is the one Australia bought, it's, again, the impact is so different. So I think good abstract art is incredibly difficult to do, because you have to go beyond reality to do it. And therefore, it's more anchored in your creative processes. So I think to do it with integrity is very difficult. And what I've noticed is that the best abstract artists, often when you look at things they did earlier, they're extremely accurate representational drawings or paintings. So they painted a frog that you think was going to jump off the paper, that sort of thing. And it was once they learnt those skills, they were able then to use those skills to disconnect from that literal representation. The trouble is, when people see it as a way of avoiding having to develop those skills, then I think you get very shallow results, which I personally don't find very compelling. But yeah, that's just my thought on that. Modern art, it's just very hard to do well. Big Goober, yes, I have seen Kim's drawings. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Probably Instagram is where I see most of my drawing artworks of others, and there's certainly a number of people there who I follow, and often very different style. And it's not that I try and copy anyone's style, but I let their style become part of my understanding of the craft, of the art of drawing, particularly with pen at this stage. And so I see what they do, and I think about that, and I compare the effect of how they've represented something with the effect I create with my marks. And it lets me, I don't sit and try and draw what they've drawn their way by copying their marks, but I let that inform my creative thought processes, so that it becomes an option, or an increased option of something I could try and do with what I do. And someone else's style might encourage me to try and simplify my style, or it might try and encourage me to add more detail in some ways, or for some drawings at least, it might encourage me to be a little more precise and to be able to explore a different visual effect from that precision. So yeah, it can be very helpful to look at other people's work. Yep, watercolor can be unforgiving. Hakim, thanks. Yeah, glad that was helpful then. Do I draw early in the morning? What does my preferred day look like when drawing? Look, I draw most days, Abel. I'm pretty into my YouTube channel at the moment. If you haven't noticed, I'm getting close to 1,000 videos, which really have all been made in the last 2.5 years, I think. And part of what I like about the channel is that it encourages me to draw more than I would draw otherwise. So I don't find drawing first thing in the morning particularly easy. I think because, well, look, it's winter here now, so it's cold in the morning, and it's hard when your fingers sort of feel just cold and hard. And so probably later morning. In practice, I'd probably do most of my drawing early to mid to later afternoon, but that's not the way I'd like to do it. I'd like to do more earlier for all sorts of reasons, probably so that I finish the video that goes with the drawing earlier. If I'm finishing the drawing at 5, then it's going to be a late edit. If I'm finishing the drawing at 11, it's going to be a much happier finishing time for me. But we all have our own rhythms, and some people work very well at night, later at night, with these sorts of things. So after dinner is when their mind is in the right place. And but I'm the older I get, I don't do so well later at night. So and I've always had to get up early for jobs I've had, and I do enjoy the mornings. But I just don't find them a great, like really early, like 7 or 8 a.m. I just don't find that a great drawing time personally. But yeah, we all need to find our own rhythm for productivity. And really what that looks like is also partly what we want to get out of our drawing. That's the other thing to bear in mind too. Jackson Pollock, thank you, Ian. You're being my brain's trust. Is that a phrase that the rest of the world has? Yes, doing all my reference looking out for me. Jackson Pollock, of course it is. Yes, I think every Australian who did art finished up in Canberra for some reason or another, and finished up going to the National Gallery as part of that, which was great for the art students and very tedious for everyone who couldn't care less about art. But we all had to see what our government had just spent $1 million on in the 70s. Ian used to have some axolotls. Yep. Bob is saying, I keep failing, and when I do, I tend to get distracted. Right. Okay. So it starts to come from discouragement, is what you're saying, and that's a very different question to, I think, the sort of thrust of what you asked before. So how do we deal with discouragement when we draw? And again, when we're discouraged, there's a reason for it, and it may not be the same reason for each of us, or even for us at any given point. When I'm discouraged, it's a good indication that something I'm wanting to do or happen is being blocked, or it's not happening fast enough, or it's not happening in the way I want it, or not at all. So the question is, what am I not getting from doing this that I was wanting to get? And it may be I'm not getting, it's not fun. I thought it'd be fun, and it's hard work. It might be, I thought I was going to be really good, and I don't seem to be. So maybe my ego's taking a bit of a hit. It might have been, I'm going to draw, and that'll let me, once I get good, that'll let me make all these things that I can sell as a side hustle and make a good and easy, fun income on the side. And I find that, in fact, it's not so easy to make stuff that people want to buy. And so I start to get discouraged with the drawing side of it. So it really comes down to, why am I discouraged? Because if I can deal with that, I mean, I may just work out that, in fact, I don't really want to draw. I want to make money from drawing. And since I can't make money from drawing, I don't have enough interest in drawing to persevere with it. And that's fine. There's no law that says we have to draw. It might be that I'm discouraged because I was hoping to make myself feel better by doing really impressive drawings, and I haven't, and now it's worked the opposite way. Well, maybe I just need to work a bit harder, or maybe I need to work out why I feel like I need to have a successful drawing to prove something about myself. Maybe that's the problem. If we can work out why we're discouraged, or it may really be, and I think this is perhaps more common, is that we've grown up as kids who everyone has said, oh, gee, you're artistic. Oh, you've got a lot of talent. Maybe we did art at school, and it was easier for us to do well than other people in the class with what we drew, that I was always able to look at my drawing and think, well, that's better than theirs and theirs and theirs and theirs. Gosh, that one doesn't even look like anything. And so it gives us this confidence about our ability. And then as an adult, we go to start drawing, and we're kind of thinking, gosh, I am, I've got some talent. People have always said it won't be too hard. And then we find it's much harder than we thought. That can be discouraging, but it's actually the start of properly learning to draw. Because I actually don't think there's such a thing as talent per se, but I think our life experience has equipped us, different ones of us, differently for the sorts of skills and talents, and more importantly, observations and mindsets that we need to draw successfully. And therefore, some of us just, like, I'll say by chance, because it wasn't deliberate, but by chance, the upbringing, the life circumstances, the exposure, the experiences that we've had when we were younger meant we were able to produce better artwork than other kids in the class. And therefore, everyone thought we could just do it magically, and we did too. But the truth is, there were reasons why we were drawing better than other people. It might be I didn't like sport, and so I was in the house a whole lot more, and I didn't like reading. So there was a pencil or paper, and I just began to play around with copying my favorite cartoon characters or something. Whereas for the 3/4 of the class who loved being outside kicking a ball or running around or climbing trees or whatever, they didn't do that. And so they weren't developing the same observation skills, the same hand-eye coordination with the pen skills that I was developing. And I wasn't aware that I was developing them. I was just having a bit of fun and I didn't want to go outside or read a book or whatever. And when we start school as 5-year-olds, or when we sit in art in high school as 12-year-olds or whatever, it looks like I can just do it. And so it's more natural for him. Whereas there are reasons why I could just do it. And I think that's more the case. I've been down that rabbit hole so long, I forget the question I started with. But oh yeah, it was getting distracted. That's right. Yeah. So look, that's what I'd kind of be saying, that if the distraction is coming from discouragement about progress, there's some goal that I had, whether it was a conscious goal or not. So if I was wanting to make money for a side hustle, then that's probably a goal I'm very conscious of. But if I'm just hoping to, say, make myself feel better about myself, then that may be a goal I had with my drawing that I haven't really acknowledged within myself. And therefore, when it starts to get blocked, I start to feel not so good about drawing, but I don't understand why. So if we can work out what we're unhappy about, what the drawing experience isn't doing for us that we thought it would, then that can be a helpful way to then push through that if we want to. Best way to improve my drawing skills, I think it's to draw, more than we watch or read about drawing or look at drawings. We have to actually draw. But I feel that understanding the process helps us. I personally think that when I look at a drawing that I've done, 80, 90, 95% of what's in that drawing was done before I put the pen on the paper. It was to do with what I was able to see and how I was able to see my reference. And then the planning I did in my head for how I was wanting the drawing to look, the sort of effect I was trying to create, how I was going to perhaps manipulate my photo or what was in front of me to create a certain effect. And then after that, working out what marks with my pen are going to create that visual effect in my drawing. And where was I going to put what marks, and where was I going to start, and then progress that drawing to drawing, directly in ink freehand. So to give myself every chance of capturing the right proportions and then keeping the scale consistent. What strategies was I going to use to do that? All of that takes place before the pen hits the paper. And all of that is the most important part of the process. The actual skills that we see on the paper, the lines, the marks, believe it or not, that's not the hard part. The hard part is knowing where to put what lines where, for what reason, what we're trying to achieve with them all together at the end. That's the hard part. That's the challenge. That's the 90% in our head before the pen hits the paper. The deceiving thing is that it doesn't take 80 or 90% of the time. And so we don't realize how vital it is. But even though it doesn't take 80 to 90% of the time, I believe it's 80 to 90% of the impact of a finished drawing. It's a bit like anyone. It's a bit like if a professional musician gets up to play, they can often play something that they've never seen before incredibly well. They've never heard before. They just see the music and play it. They can quite possibly do that extremely well. But we don't see the hours and hours and hours and hours of learning to see notes and work out what those notes mean, and working out how they can interpret those notes in their own creative way as well, to then play it. It looks like they can just do it, but it was the years and years of work and practice and study and effort and experience at all the elements of playing that instrument that have enabled them to actually just get up and perform something that they haven't seen before. And if I find a reference of something and I draw it today, say, it's not just from that drawing session. What I'm drawing is coming from the total accumulation of learning to see and to think and to understand and to make creative choices about what I'm looking at, and then translate that into marks onto the paper. And the success or otherwise of the drawing really comes from all the stuff that's in my head. It's not because I can or can't draw a straight line, in most cases, but it's knowing where to put the line. It's having the confidence to hold the pen. It's lots of things that aren't really connected with the technique as such. It's knowing what of many options of marks I'm going to use. All these things happen in our head, and if we don't give space, room, understanding of that, then we can rush to start drawing. And I think most of the drawings I look at with my drawing students, when I'm critiquing them, I'm thinking they've just rushed to start drawing without having seen what they've needed to see in the reference to draw it well. They think they have, because no one's going to start drawing if they're aware they haven't seen enough. They think they've seen enough, but they simply haven't. And therefore they're now drawing, in a sense, from their imagination, from memories that they've filed away of this sort of object, rather than drawing from this specific reference, if that makes sense. Alien, can I recommend a book? Drawings in Node 10 and describes the ratio of die. Look, I'm sorry, Alien, I can't. I mean, I think I have so much empathy for the self-taught artist, because I'm a self-taught artist and I actually haven't come through a kind of a direction of formal study of art and of that often has a kind of a sort of a wide range of approaches and techniques. So I can't really go beyond what I have in me and my experience. But I would certainly encourage you to if this is something that you want to have more input in, so that you've got more creative resources within yourselves to call on for the direction you want your art to go, then I would very much recommend that you do find a book or find references that do show this, and look at artworks that embody what you're after, because I think both work well. Exposure to the sorts of artwork that we aspire to draw, that excites us, because the sorts of styles and outputs that we want that excite us will have more energy to put into those. So I think that's important. Or some sort of source on the internet. Yeah, no, look, I'm sorry. I don't. Working with brush pen along with fine liners. Yeah. No, in my mind, I've sort of got a picture of the sort of artwork I think you're wanting to produce. But I can say I'm glad that you're talking about dark and light and positive and negative spacing, because these things are so important to how our drawing can look at the end. And one of the problems, I talked earlier in the session, if you were here for then, but if not, I talked earlier in the session about often our drawing journey starts as children, and it starts with looking at comics, which of course are a highly simplified representation of real objects mostly, and copying the comments, the comics. So we're doing lines, we're doing outlines. And it very much gives a focus that drawing is outlining objects accurately. Now, that creates often a very cartoon-like look because, in fact, without realizing it, our inspiration, our understanding of drawing comes from a cartoon base, which is great if we want to draw cartoons. It's not as helpful if we're wanting to create drawings that capture a stronger sense of realism. And one of the weaknesses of a cartoon approach is that the emphasis is on always just drawing outlines of shapes. And there are other ways to see and to conceptualize and to draw and to see in terms of value, in terms of lights and darks. And once we start to see in terms of values of lights and darks, and we start to draw by lights and darks, we realize that we're often looking at the spaces between things as equal contributors to the visual impact of our drawing as the objects, the positive things, the objects, the negative things, the space between the positive things is just as much, if you like, a shape to draw. It's just as much part of the overall form. And lights and darks, particularly shadows, often highlight or reveal an object's form actually more effectively than drawing the outline of the object. And lights and darks create, I think, incredible visual drama when we look at something. And so I almost always, with a drawing, particularly if it's a more considered, not so much at one of these 10 or 15-minute drawings that I do, but more of a 45 to 60-minute drawing, I will usually deliberately in some way push the values in my reference further in my drawing to create maybe a focal point or to exaggerate the effect in my reference that made me want to draw it, but I increase the values to make that effect more striking even, hopefully without going too far. Thanks, an organism. I hope that's helpful. I've had my share of discouragement in my drawing, in my painting, in life, as we all have. So, it's good to learn to navigate our way through it because it is part of being a human. I think trying to be honest and work out where it comes from so that we can work out whether we want to deal with it, and if so, how or not, I found very helpful myself. What's Red J saying? How curious. I tend to think of other things when drawing. I also wander off a lot, but I don't find any problem about it. Just let my mind wander off while drawing and let myself relax. Look, firstly, whatever works for you to give you satisfaction when you're drawing is fine, because none of us have to draw. And so we want to get some sort of benefit from it, and we're expecting to. And you're not alone in that, Red J. A lot of people actually draw to relax. They draw just to disconnect. But they draw, therefore, in a way that lets them do that. And so a lot of people do a lot of highly detailed, almost like fractal kind of things, design work of just growing shapes from a central point outward, and do kind of disconnect into that. That's no problem. We're not all drawing to win the major drawing award of our country. We're often drawing to help unwind, to be distracted from something else, or just to generally relax. No problem at all. Night saying on day 2 of drawing, vanishing points blew my mind and I was able to draw a proper 3D perspective. I wonder if looking up more concepts is too much info at a time, or do I try and focus on one only? Look, I think ideally the best time to work on a concept that's relevant to our drawing is when it comes up in our drawing. The only problem is if we're pushing ourselves too far too quickly with our drawing, and therefore there are too many concepts for us to be comfortably able to understand and maybe to keep separate also in our mind. Certainly with perspective, I think that would apply at the one time. So that, I think, is the question. But if I'm aware there's an issue that I'm dealing with in the sorts of things I like to draw now. So if I'm drawing figures and I start to realize that a lot of my arms don't look real great, then I need to start to look at a perspective on arms, and I need to look at anatomy for arms to understand the muscles more, to understand how and why they look the way they do, so that I can have more accurate reference materials in my head when I draw. Or maybe I just need to buy one of those little figures where I can bend all the arms and legs, or whatever. In a sense, I can navigate my own solution when I'm aware of what the problem is I need to navigate through or around. So can I just say, with perspective, I think the biggest problem is that most of the perspective videos I've seen on YouTube are all very, very similar. They're basically boxes on flat planes with a very sterile looking context. And they really owe more to the needs of architects and draftsmen, draftspeople, back in the the 30s and the 40s and the 50s than to artists. That they're really designed to showcase a building that's pretty disconnected from a real life context, and certainly uncluttered by a real life context, because the building is meant to be the showcase, and that works great for doing that. But those little sort of conceptual videos don't actually give an artist the information that an artist needs when they look at real life. And I think the biggest example of this is in the fact that what those videos show is true. There's no problem with that. But it doesn't work that way when you start to change some of the things. So when the ground goes up and down, it's different. When the boxes aren't aligned at parallel or at right angles to each other, there are differences. And most of life is not dead straight and aligned at 90 degrees. And so when we look at a street, streets curve slightly. The street might curve and go uphill. The street may curve and go down into a dip and come up again if it's a long street, and curve at the end. And we're going to have real problems applying our little 1, 2, 3 point perspective theory videos with boxes on straight lines and vanishing points. We're going to have real problems applying what we learned there into this real life street that does all the things that streets do in real life, and therefore affect the buildings in those ways. The problem is that the videos haven't told us that they haven't told us enough. And so we watch the video and we think we understand it. And we do. But we don't understand that this video hasn't told us everything we need to know. So when we go to look at the real life situations, we think, I can't understand perspective because it doesn't make any sense here. And it's just that the perspective video didn't tell me this only works under these conditions. It's going to look different. It will be a bit more complex when the ground's not flat, when the objects are not lined up precisely. But I may not realize this, and I presume that the video is teaching me what I need to know, and therefore the problems in my head, rather than the problems that the video was never actually designed for my needs as an artist, even if it was made by an artist. Because what happens is, perspective is a topic that people need, and that they Google, they search for, and therefore people make perspective videos because they know people look at them. And the problem is they're often made by simply copying another video that they've seen. And so we repeat over and over in video after video the shortcomings as well as the strengths of that teaching. Yeah. So I have a number of video playlists, a number of perspective playlists, and one of them is like 12 or 13 videos long, and because I've got 100 videos on perspective or more, but I've sort of pulled out a key one for each of the areas. So there's one that, for instance, talks about understanding perspective when the street goes downhill, or understanding perspective when the street goes uphill, understanding perspective when the street curves around the corner. There's one on 1 and 2 and 3 point perspective. There's one on interior perspective. So it's there's one on what I've just talked about, the problem with perspective videos. And yeah, and the thing I get most frustrated about is that it leads, this leaves people thinking that they're not able to understand it, when that's not true at all. They've just put too much faith in the video. And this is the problem with, or the challenge with being self-taught and finding our own resources. The internet's amazing. YouTube's amazing. There is so much there that we can go and we can look for. And every time I have to wear a tie, which is about once a year, I Google how to tie a full Windsor knot, and I sit there watching the video, working out how to do my tie so that it looks proper. It's a wonderful way of finding things that we want to learn about. The problem is, if it's something we want to learn about, we may not know enough to know whether this is actually a good presentation for me and for my needs. And we can assume that because they're the teacher, or they seem to be the teacher, this is somehow, I have to make this work, that if there's a problem, it's me, not that this is not suitable, because it seems like it's suitable, it sounds like it's suitable. So, that's the challenge with the self taught artists, that we don't always know for sure whether the material is not so much whether it's good or bad, but whether it's helpful for me. And of course, there are different ways of approaching drawing, and they're not all compatible. So I may watch one video that leads me to start drawing another way, and then I watch another video that comes from a different direction, and I start to get confused because I haven't quite realized that these are not compatible, and I'm trying to do that, I'm trying to do this, and really getting into a tangle, thinking, well, how am I meant to do it? And again, blaming myself that somehow I can't comprehend what these videos are saying, when it's a bigger, more structural issue, that I haven't actually understood that not all videos are equal, and not all videos are interchangeable or can be stacked on top of each other, because they go off in different directions for different journeys. And I need to find the ones for the journey I want to go on. So, okay. Okay. Thank you, Ian. Bern Hogarth's books are great for learning to draw with anatomy. So there's a recommendation that people wanting to work on their figures can use. That's right. And look, cartoony is a great technique. The thing is, when we choose it, we can embrace it with all the strengths and possibilities that it has. And that's the difference. It's understanding the different ways of drawing look on the paper, and the sort of different drawings they produce, that lets us then align that with what sort of artwork we're wanting to produce. And so it's about giving ourselves a clearer focus, because if I want to improve, knowing where I want to improve to be is I think really important. What's Bobbin saying? Mixing colors with gouache is very confusing and hard. And also when I apply on a 3D form, it makes it even harder. Look, I actually have hardly ever used gouache. It's not an easy art medium to use. I used to use it for, back when I was in high school, I had some gouache paints and we called them poster paints because they give a very nice, you can get some lovely bright colors, and they're very good for flat areas of color. So in design work, as opposed to kind of what we used to call expressionistic painting, which is like painting scenes and people where you want shadows and darkness and whatnot happening, light highlights. The other thing I didn't realize at the time, but I've come to realize since as an adult, is that some colors mix well, some pigments mix well together and others don't. And I think with gouache, that's even a more challenging issue. Some colors, when you mix them together, you don't get what the natural assumption of this on that is going to be. They actually mix in a way that produces the, totally random result. And I also think how to put this, of the gouache artworks I've seen, the ones I like the most, the ones that really impress me, are the ones that layer, different gouache colors on different gouache colors. Has a bit of a, oh look, this is going to sound like a negative, but it's not, because I really like them. Bit of a blobby effect, a bit of a simplified form effect, because there's not as much mixing of colors and there's not as much gradation of value and color blending and changing from one form to another that you'd get, say, more commonly in oil painting. So that's really, I think, yeah. I think the other thing I found challenging about gouache is that you put it down and it's not like watercolor. It feels in some ways more like acrylic, and you can put it over the top, but only under certain conditions. And if the top layer starts to pick up the bottom layer, you can get some really unhappy results. And it's a bit like watercolor in that you can't just keep going over it. There is a point where you have to kind of take it. Yeah. Yeah. Bob, and look, the only thing I would say is consider, is gouache the most appropriate type of paint for the effect you're trying to create? Maybe you'd be better off with acrylic. Gouache does have some very specific characteristics, and it's not something I would rush to if I was trying to paint something that was kind of more like how oil paintings look. I'd be thinking of using acrylic if I wanted a water-based paint for that. So that's just the other thought. Sometimes we can use the paints that we've got because someone gave them to us, or we've just always had them, or whatever. And they, again, it's like you don't know what you don't know. And when I first started using gouache, I didn't realize how it was different to the acrylic paint that we used at school, for instance. And that was only later I realized, oh, I see, I had all these problems with that because it is, and when I was given some oil paints that a neighbor's son had, and he'd grown up and moved away, and I didn't know how to use them, and I just assumed they worked like water-based paints, and they didn't. And I didn't, I played around with them, and then I didn't touch them for 10 years because I just thought, oh, they're too hard. Like, I don't understand that. And it's simply that I didn't know what I didn't know. So, but maybe acrylics would work better for you, Bobbin. Benta, great, thank you. What makes the ugly stage so important in a drawing? I tend to be discouraged whenever I get there. Oh, look, you need to paint. There's much more of an ugly stage with painting, and it stays ugly for a much longer length of time, especially painting in oils. Look, this is where you've got to have faith. This is where you've got to understand that drawing is a process, and it's a process in a given drawing but it's also a process in our drawing experience. And I talk a lot about that one of the big problems is we don't understand drawing is actually learning a skill, and it's like learning any skill in lots of ways. And there are fundamental learning issues that help us learn anything, and that includes drawing. And we don't always realize that. And when we learn that it's like that, learning to draw is like learning the piano, suddenly we're not expecting to do artworks from the start. I'm always surprised at how often when people start to draw, they feel like they're meant to have an artwork at the end, that they're going to have an artwork at the end. And that means that all of their thinking is towards producing a finished artwork instead of, I'm learning to draw. If I'm learning the piano, well, I expect to hit wrong notes. It's not going to discourage me. I know that with practice, careful practice, I will overcome all that, and I will learn to hit the right notes, and then I'll learn to go beyond just trying to hit the right notes, and I'll learn to do something great with the right notes as well. But somehow when we start to learn to draw, we think that we're going to have an artwork at the end, or if we're going to be any good at drawing, we will have an artwork at the end. And then there's all this pressure to not make mistakes and not to risk anything that will mess up the artwork. Or we get really discouraged where we don't have an artwork. And because we want an impressive artwork, we often tackle things that are way too hard for our experience and understanding to have a reasonable chance of doing well. I mean, any one drawing could be by chance great or not great, but it's the consistency that comes from the level of understanding and experience that we have. And if we don't understand that, we're going to get it thinking, oh, this will be a great drawing because it's a really interesting photo. And it's an interesting photo because there's lots of challenging things in it that I'm not actually ready to draw, but I don't know enough to understand that. Whereas if I was starting to learn the piano, I would never grab a Beethoven concerto and say, oh, look at all these notes. This is going to sound amazing. No, because it'll be obvious to me that I can't do it. But somehow we can grab a really complex reference and go, this is going to be an amazing drawing, and then jump in and drown because we're just overwhelmed and either produce a bad drawing that discourages us, or even worse, produce a bad drawing that we don't realize is a bad drawing. And therefore, we start to now incorporate these weaknesses into every drawing we do because we don't appreciate really what's happening. We don't know enough to make a judgment. So, and when the focus is on the end product, Bento, we don't then create a healthy process. So with the painting, I learned that I have to endure the underpainting stage where I'm covering the canvas, where I'm setting the foundations for the paint that you'll actually see or at least notice at the end. Drawing is no different. And one of the problems with perfectionism is often if we often give up on drawings halfway through because we feel that we've ruined them somehow. Something's not quite right. It's not been perfect. And we're thinking, and all we can see is our mistakes. And we never learn the second half of the drawing skills. There are skills that we need when we started drawing. I so often have people ask me, how do you start a drawing? How do you know where to start? How do you do those first things? What are you thinking? No one has ever asked me, how do you finish a drawing? What's your thinking process for pulling it together at the end when you are actually creating the very final thing that people will see? How do you do that? No one ever thinks of that. And yet that's just as significant, just as key, that once we've established the framework, how do we, for better or worse, how do we build on that and how do we pull it together? What are the final things we're looking at, thinking for, tweaking to really give our drawing every bit of whatever it is we're wanting it to have, we're wanting it to show. I guess there's a video there, isn't there? How do we finish a drawing rather than how do we start a drawing? And the thing is, Benta, that we only discover that when we do it. We only discover it when we push past the ugly stage. But I would say that if you feel that you're getting bogged down in the ugly stage, then I think the best way to get out of that is to change something about the way you draw. So I suggest that you draw less challenging scenes on a smaller scale in less time, and you actually put the clock and you say, I'm going to have this drawing finished in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever's realistic for you and for what you're drawing. And so it forces you to keep moving through the process. Keep moving through the process and work it out. Get to the end and get to do the good part without taking an hour and a half to get to the ugly stage, and then you don't have time or energy to continue it. And you're left with something thinking, because the real fun part is the second half. The real fun part is when you've done the ugly and you've taken all those risks and you've gone slower to kind of establish things and some precision. And now the rhythm, the tempo of the drawing picks up. And can ask, if you're finding these thoughts helpful, please hit the like button for me. But because every drawing has a rhythm, has a tempo. And again, this is a topic I've got swirled in my head to do a video on. I just haven't decided whether it's going to be a drawing video, a voice to camera, a face to camera video, or a combination. But every drawing session has its own tempo, and if we understand that, we can work with it, we can embrace it, we can enjoy the challenges of each part of this process from the start to the end, and the hitting the ugly stage and pushing through it. Okay, but in some ways we need faith in our ability to at least get some measure towards where we're wanting to go with each drawing. Okay, and we only learn this by pushing through and getting the results. And if we don't get the results we want, that's great, because now I have a focus for my next drawing, and the focus may partly be to wind back how much I'm doing. I might realize I'm trying to do too much too quickly. I'm running before I can walk, and I'm therefore falling over a lot. And so that teaches me to pull back. Or I might get some insight into a particular weakness. I might be able to see that my angles are just never right. So I know to focus on my angles or whatever, if that's helpful. Red J, I don't know. A lot of people tell me I'm talented, but feel like my skills are stagnant, that I am still stuck in this level for years, so impatient for improvement. So I thought of learning fundamentals. Look, there is no greater burden than people telling us we've got artistic talent. That's a huge burden to have, because now I feel I've got to not just impress myself, but I have to you just walked into the camera, darling. It's all right. My wife's got some people coming here shortly, so she's just doing a bit of a tidy up. Then people saying that we've got natural talent, that we're really good, because now we feel the pressure to keep impressing them. So that can be a real burden. I've got videos on how to start a drawing, if that's what you mean, Red J, but you might mean bigger in terms of the process. Look, another video I'm thinking of doing is actually spelling out the process and progress of a drawing session. So maybe I should do that, because I think that's more what you're asking. That might be a good. I'll just actually write that down, because I will forget process and progress of one drawing session. Antoine, very true. Read perspective videos. Took me way too long to realize that vanishing points, the number of them, is not a global property of the scene itself, but of how each object is oriented. Well put, Antoine. Well put. Everyone read Antoine's comment. It's a good summary of one of the points I was saying. Yep, yep, yep. And the problem is the videos don't tell us. They leave us thinking, I've told you what you need to know now to apply perspective. And then we go to do that and we're thinking, I must be stupid. I thought I understood it, and now I don't know what to do. And the problem is that the thing I'm looking at, the videos hasn't told me what to do, and it doesn't apply as directly as it seems to in the video to this situation. So we need to have more faith in ourselves sometimes. Ian, the internet is a phenomenal resource for artists. Used to have to scour through magazines and library books. Yep, absolutely. I found a box actually not long ago of all my old painting magazines that I used to pick up secondhand when I saw them in secondhand shops. All the big Australian art magazines. Yeah, it's crazy thinking that was the world, isn't it? Absolutely crazy. Green Jewel. Hi, Stephen. Just found your videos and I'm hooked. Great, helpful advice. Thank you. That's very kind. Knight, very insightful and lengthy answer. Thank you. I'll think more about what's presented to me. Like music, the more experience you get, the more you realize just how small your knowledge actually is. But as you build it, you build on it. And I think that's why, I mean, learning skills often does have this sort of foundational concept. There are foundational things that are fundamental, and a lot of them are more to do with just the learning process in general than the particular skill I'm learning. And I think my drawing did develop fairly quickly once I started. It was partly because a lot of my painting experience was surprisingly relevant. But I think the bigger reason was that I am a trained high school teacher, and though I didn't teach for very long, and it was English and history, it wasn't art, but to be a teacher, to learn how to teach, you have to understand how we learn so that we can pitch what we do to the students who are learning, and that the way we learn, we can engage with that with the way we teach. And I think I wasn't making videos. I was drawing for myself, but I was able to also be my teacher, perhaps in a more explicit way than I could have if I hadn't done the teacher training. That I was more aware that how we learn is actually, that learning is a skill, and I needed to tie in what I was trying to do with my drawing to work in with the way we learn any skill. Yeah, and one of the things is that we do create foundations when we learn something, and then we build on those foundations. And so not swamping myself with things that aren't at the right level for where I'm at is an important part. We always want to push ourselves, but we don't want to overwhelm ourselves. And it's learning to see the difference. And part of the reason we can't always judge that is we often don't mark our work. If I'm self-taught, then I'm my teacher as well as my student, as well as being the student. And I need to be ruthless with my red pen after a drawing, not to be down on myself, but to see what's not working so that I can plan the next part of my journey better. Whether it's, as I said before, whether it's do easier things, or whether there are specific skills that are weak in my drawing that I could look at just as a skill, like say hatching, cross hatching, or perspective, or light and dark, whatever, or color. I can just look at that. Or maybe I need to wind back everything until I can incorporate all the things that are involved in the drawing at an easier level better, and then increase the complexity now that I can put things together better. I need to give time to considering how the process of learning is working for me and how I'm engaging with it and how I can engage with it better. What's good watercolor paper to use when you upgrade from the cheap stuff? I think it's, I did a video on the best materials to use, and I think, look, basically it's what you can afford to use. Watercolor paper is very expensive. So don't buy beyond what you can afford to replace, because you don't want to be limiting your painting because you don't want to waste the paper or use up the paper. You want to save the paper for a masterpiece. All this puts very unhelpful pressure on us. So the good water paper is whatever the next level you can afford, and you can afford to waste it. You can afford to do paintings that don't turn out, because then you will be free to keep painting. And being free to keep painting is more important for our paintings in the end than the paper they're on. Yeah. And that's the same with any art supplies. They can be horrendously expensive. The best art supplies are the ones we can waste without a moment's thought. That we never have to impinge on our output because we're afraid of using up or wasting materials, and we're never feeling that we have to somehow save them for something special. Now, every day is special. What I'm doing now is special because I'm teaching myself to draw, and so I need to be free to use the brushes, the pens, the paper, the ink. Google the comic artist Alex Ross for some amazing examples of gouache painting. Thank you, Ian. You're like a big art reference encyclopedia today. Thank you, Alex Ross, for amazing examples of gouache painting. I do love gouache painting done extremely well. And I think it's partly because I know how hard it is from my experience, or from my experience at least. It seems very hard to do well, and therefore I really admire artworks that have used it. An organism, very insightful art teacher. Oh, thank you. That's very kind. I've got lots of videos. My playlists may help you navigate through all those videos. And if you are wanting to, work on a particular area, see if I have a playlist on it. And if you haven't hit the like button, I'm needing to wind this up. So we're about to have a few visitors arrive, so I'll be winding up in a few minutes. But please hit the like button if you haven't. But I'll see if I can just quickly grab a few more of these questions. Thank you so much for the advice. Your points are spot on. Really appreciate it. Perfectionism has been an enemy. Look, perfectionism has been an enemy for so many of us, and it's not something that's really talked about helpfully. And yet it's at the heart for many of us of our drawing problems. And I do actually have a few videos. Well, there's 1,000 videos, so there's a few videos on most things, but that deal with perfectionism, with understanding it just as an artist. I'm not a psychologist or a counselor, but some strategies, some ways we can adjust our drawing process to help us push through perfectionism, to not give it a place to kind of grow in our drawing session, that I have found absolutely game-changing for me. I am not worried about mistakes the way I used to be once. And so hopefully that they might be helpful for you. There's a reason why. I mean, I've had people tell me they started drawing, and if they make mistakes, they get discouraged and don't want to finish it. But equally, if they don't make any mistakes, the pressure that they're going to make a mistake becomes so great that they can't finish it. Can I say that one of the reasons I began to draw freehand in pen was so that I could disconnect from the whole game of erasing lines to make them more right. I just felt like this had become such an unsatisfying outcome of my desire to draw well, that it was just ruining the whole drawing experience. And I thought, I need to make myself not be focused on mistakes so much. And the most obvious way for that was to remove any way of dealing with them, having to embrace them and work them into my drawing. And what did I do? Well, I learned that there are skills I could develop conceptually and technique-wise to incorporate the mistakes into my drawing so that they're really not obvious at the end. I also learned ways to draw to minimize my chance of making mistakes, of putting unhelpful marks on my paper. It's not so much that there are good and bad lines, but there are ones And there are lines and marks that are more helpful for the effect I'm trying to create by the end of the drawing than others. And by taking the eraser out of my hand by drawing directly with pen was, in the end, a tremendously liberating thing. It was probably the single most beneficial thing I've done in my sort of drawing experience. Thanks. Thanks. Another question. Teachers advise me to do thumbnail sketches when I like to jump right in with the first sketch I have for a painting. Is there a right or wrong way? Look, there are no right or wrong ways for anything. It's what works for me. I don't do thumbnails as such. When I paint from a reference, and I crop the reference and tweak the reference digitally to, as much as I can, create what I'm wanting to paint, at least as much as a photo can capture that. And then so I these big ones I grid from a photo, that I grid the photo. But I'm thinking, if I were to paint in oils now, because I haven't painted for like 5 years, I've been drawing. If I was to paint in oils now that I've been freehand drawing for a number of years with ink, I think I'm ready to try freehand oil painting and just see how it goes, and maybe draw it with a more graphic feel, with a more sketching look, and going for stronger just basically putting into practice all the things I've learned in drawing, but incorporate those understandings and techniques into my painting. I think that would be fun. But if not using thumbnails works for you, then, but I would suggest you give it a go, because it might be that there are some benefits in thumbnails that you simply don't realize because you haven't used them. I don't do thumbnails as such for my drawings, because they're really, as a concept, it's conceptually just as applicable to drawing as painting. But I experiment with my marks on a scrap of paper every single drawing. Even these 10, 15-minute daily drawing exercises that I'm doing, I spend 2 or 3 minutes just playing around with marks to create certain effects, to see if they create the effects I'm after for my drawing from the reference. It also lets me see if the pen choice, the 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.5 millimeter pen, is the best choice as well. So, and it also helps just to warm up my mental processes, my eye-hand coordination, and all of that. And I do that, and sometimes I actually place that just off camera so I can refer to it. And sometimes it doesn't work, but in not working, it points me into what will work better. And so sometimes, and I don't always, I'm often confident enough that I can, I know what to do now when I do the drawing. Sometimes I might do a second marks exercise, but more often I think, yes, okay, no, this doesn't work. I'll need to do it this way. And so it gives me direction even when it doesn't work. It points me closer to what will work. But I can't imagine doing a drawing without playing around just for a few moments with the pen. So it's kind of like a thumbnail, but it's not a thumbnail. I'm not doing the whole thing. Or it might be a part where there's a lot of value. I might just practice the hatching direction I'm thinking of using to see if it really does work or not. Exactly what I do with my marks depends totally on the reference and where I think the challenges are. It might be just a very detailed section that I want to see whether, for the size I'm going to draw it, I can get the detail in that I need, or whether I need to use a thinner pen, or whether I need to simplify what I'm drawing to less detail. I get to experiment with these before I start my drawing. And I've also got a bit of confidence in my mark making. I talk about tempo and rhythm of an overall drawing session. And one of the things that happened is in the second half, for all sorts of reasons, my drawing tempo, rhythm, and confidence is further developed than at the start, where often a lot of my marks are quite tentative. Have you ever got to the second half of a drawing and you're looking at the first stuff that you drew and thinking that the marks the lines look a bit weak, look a bit timid, and you almost, and often they're in a central place. So you wish you could do them again with the more confident marks that you're making, because you've simply warmed up. Well, if we do some of our warm up on paper, then we're starting with our first marks in a more confident position. Works for me anyway. Oh, thanks, Tabby. All the best for you and your granddaughter. What a great thing to do with a grandchild, to do drawing. Possibly thumbnail sketches are more useful. Yep. I think so, and maybe even necessary. To figure out composition and stuff. I mean, I guess I crop my photo to help work out composition. That's helpful. Okay, well, look, I think probably I need to finish up. We've got people arriving any minute, and I think, go and do a drawing after all this talk of doing drawings and how we draw. So if you haven't hit the like button, please do that. If you haven't seen any of my playlists, then I do have a lot of videos, and it can be a bit overwhelming, but I'm trying to use the playlist more and more now to make it easier to find the things that may be particularly relevant for where you're at in your drawing journey. But otherwise, all the best with your drawing journeys. It's the morning for me. It's now just after 10 in the morning, so I have my day ahead of me. If it's your evening, then good night and sleep well, and we'll see you next time. And if you've not caught my other live sessions, then why not check out those and maybe put them on in the background while you do some gardening or prep for dinner or whatever. But hey, whatever you're drawing, however you draw it, however it's turning out, make sure you have fun. If we have fun, then we win every drawing session. I'll see you next time. Bye.